Let me tell you about a conversation I had that changed how I think about retirement investing forever. It was with a man who had worked his entire life, saved diligently, invested wisely, and accumulated what most people would consider a fortune. He came to me for advice, and his question was simple. Warren, when can I stop worrying? When have I won the game? That question hit me harder than almost any investment question I've ever been asked. Because here was a man who had done everything right. He had lived below his means. He had invested consistently. He had avoided the big mistakes. And yet he was still anxious, still checking his portfolio every day, still worried that somehow it could all disappear. I looked at him and I asked a question that seemed to catch him off guard. I said, "How much do you spend each year?" Not how much do you have. How much do you actually need to live the life you want to live? He thought about it for a moment and gave me a number. Then I asked him how much income his portfolio generates. Not how much it might appreciate, not what it could be worth someday. How much cash does it actually produce right now? This year, that shows up in your account. When he answered that second question, I watched his face change because his portfolio was generating more income than he spent. Not by a little, by a lot. He had been so focused on the total value of his investments, so worried about market fluctuations, that he had missed the most important fact. He had already won. The game was over. He just did not realize it. That conversation taught me something profound about retirement and investing that I want to share with you today. There is a specific moment, a precise point in your financial life when the rules of the game fundamentally change, when the strategies that got you here are no longer the strategies that will serve you best, when continuing to invest for growth is not just unnecessary but potentially harmful to your peace of mind and your financial security. Most financial advisors will never tell you this because they make money by keeping you invested, by keeping you anxious, by keeping you focused on accumulating more. But the truth is, there comes a time when enough is enough. When you have crossed the finish line, when the wisest thing you can do is recognize your victory and stop playing a game you have already won. I have thought about this question for decades because it applies to everyone who invests. At what point do you shift from building wealth to preserving it? At what point do you stop taking risks you do not need to take? At what point can you finally exhale and know that you are going to be okay? The financial industry does not want you to find that point. They want you perpetually anxious, perpetually seeking higher returns, perpetually paying them fees to manage money that does not need to be actively managed. They have created an entire vocabulary designed to keep you in the game. Sequence of returns risk, longevity risk, market timing risk, all of these are real, but the solutions they propose always seem to involve paying them more money. The truth is much simpler than they want you to believe. Financial security in retirement is not complicated. It is arithmetic. And once you understand the arithmetic, once you can do the calculation yourself, you no longer need to pay someone else to tell you whether you are okay. So today, I am going to show you exactly how to identify that moment. I am going to give you the specific calculation that tells you whether you still need to take investment risk or whether you can sleep soundly knowing you are financially secure for life. And I am going to explain what to do once you reach that point, because the transition from accumulation to preservation is one of the most important and least understood aspects of personal finance. Let me start with a story from my own life that illustrates this principle. Back in 1967, I made an investment that turned out to be one of the best of my career. The details do not matter. What matters is that by 1970, I had accumulated enough wealth that I never needed to work another day in my life. I was 40 years old. I could have stopped right there, invested conservatively, and lived comfortably forever. But I did not stop. I kept investing. I kept building, not because I needed more money, but because I genuinely love what I do. Analyzing businesses, allocating capital, building value over time. This is not work to me. This is play. If they did not pay me, I would probably pay them for the privilege. Here is the critical distinction, though. After 1970, every investment I made was a choice, not a necessity. If I lost money on a particular investment, it did not threaten my lifestyle. It did not keep me up at night. It was disappointing, sure, but it was not devastating. That psychological freedom, that ability to take risk without fear, actually made me a better investor. Because fear makes you do stupid things. Fear makes you sell at the bottom. Fear makes you chase safe investments that are not actually safe because they do not keep up with inflation. The moment you no longer need to invest for retirement is the moment you gain that freedom. The moment your passive income exceeds your expenses, the moment you could stop contributing, stop worrying, stop checking your portfolio, and know with certainty that you will be fine. Let me give you the exact calculation because this is not fuzzy math. This is precise. You have reached the point where you no longer need to invest for retirement when your investment income exceeds your annual expenses by at least 25%. Let me break that down. First, you need to know your actual annual expenses, not a guess, not an approximation, your actual spending over the past 2 or 3 years, averaged out, include everything. Housing, food, transportation, healthcare, travel, entertainment, gifts, taxes, everything you spend money on. Second, you need to calculate your reliable investment income. This is dividends from stocks, interest from bonds, distributions from funds, rental income from real estate, pension payments, Social Security. Only count income that is reliable and recurring. Do not count capital gains because those are not guaranteed. Do not count money you might make if the market goes up. Only count cash that actually shows up in your account on a predictable basis. Third, compare these two numbers. If your investment income is at least 125% of your expenses, you have won. You are there. The game is over. You no longer need to take investment risk to fund your retirement. Let me give you a concrete example. Say your annual expenses are $80,000. That is your lifestyle. That is what it costs to live the way you want to live. To be financially secure for retirement, you need investment income of at least $100,000 per year. That is your expenses plus a 25% cushion. Why the cushion? Because life is unpredictable. Healthcare costs might spike. You might need to help a family member. Inflation might run higher than expected. The cushion gives you margin for error. It lets you handle the unexpected without panic. Now, here's where most people get confused. They think about this in terms of portfolio value rather than income. They say, I have $1 million or I have $2 million, as if the size of the portfolio is what matters. It is not. What matters is what that portfolio produces. $1 million portfolio invested in growth stocks that pay no dividends produces zero income. Zero, you would have to sell shares to live, which means you are depleting your capital, which means you are vulnerable to market declines, which means you have not actually won the game at all. $1 million portfolio invested in dividend-paying stocks and bonds, yielding 5% produces $50,000 per year. That is real income. That is money you can spend without touching your principal. That is security. This is why I have always emphasized the importance of income investing, particularly as you approach and enter retirement. Growth is wonderful when you are young and accumulating, but income is what matters when you need to actually live off your investments. Let me share another principle that took me decades to fully appreciate. Once you have won the game, the objective changes completely. When you are accumulating wealth, the objective is to maximize returns. You want the highest possible growth rate because you have time to recover from setbacks, and every extra percent of return compounds dramatically over decades. But once you have won, once your income exceeds your expenses, the objective shifts to preservation. You are no longer trying to maximize returns. You are trying to minimize the probability of catastrophic loss. You are trying to ensure that your income stream continues no matter what happens in markets. This is a fundamentally different approach to investing. Instead of asking which investment will give me the highest return, you ask which investment is least likely to fail. Instead of concentrating in your best ideas, you diversify to ensure no single failure can hurt you. Instead of reaching for yield, you accept lower returns in exchange for higher safety. I have watched so many people make the mistake of continuing to invest aggressively after they have already won. They have accumulated $5 million, more than enough to fund their retirement. And they keep swinging for the fences. They keep taking risks they do not need to take. And sometimes it works out and they end up with $6 million or $7 million, but sometimes it does not work out and they end up with $3 million or $2 million. They turned a sure thing into an uncertain thing. That is not smart investing. That is gambling with money you cannot afford to lose. Let me tell you about someone I knew who made exactly this mistake. He had built a portfolio worth about $4 million by his early 60s. Invested conservatively. That portfolio could have generated $150,000 or more in annual income. His expenses were about $80,000 per year. He had won completely and totally won. But he did not see it that way. He looked at friends who had more. He read about investors who had made fortunes in technology stocks. He started to feel like $4 million was not enough. He wanted more. So he shifted his portfolio into aggressive growth stocks, companies that paid no dividends, companies that might double or might collapse. For a while it worked. His portfolio grew to $5 million, then $6 million. He felt vindicated. See, he told himself, conservative investing is for suckers. Then the market turned. His aggressive stocks fell 50%, then 60%, then 70%. Suddenly his $6 million portfolio was worth less than $2 million. His income from investments collapsed because growth stocks pay no dividends. At 70 years old, he had to go back to work part-time to make ends meet. This was entirely avoidable. If he had simply recognized that he had won and invested accordingly, he would still have his $4 million generating reliable income. He would be enjoying retirement instead of working to rebuild what he lost. The psychological trap here is real. We are conditioned to always want more, to always be optimizing, to always be comparing ourselves to others who have more. But in retirement investing, this mindset is dangerous. The goal is not to have the most money. The goal is to have enough money to live the life you want without worry. Once you have that, chasing more is pure risk with limited benefit. There is an old saying that I think about often: when you have won the game, stop playing. This does not mean you have to sell all your stocks and put everything in treasury bills. It means you should reduce risk to the point where you can survive any plausible scenario without significantly impairing your lifestyle. Let me talk about what that looks like in practice, because I know many of you want specific guidance on how to structure your portfolio once you have reached this point. The first principle is income reliability. You want investments that produce predictable, growing income regardless of market conditions. Dividend aristocrats, companies that have raised their dividends for 25 consecutive years or more, are excellent for this purpose. These are businesses that have survived recessions, market crashes, wars, pandemics, and kept paying shareholders through it all. If a company can raise its dividend every year for 25 years, that tells you something about the durability of its business model. The second principle is diversification of income sources. You do not want all your income coming from one place. Some should come from stocks, some from bonds, some from real estate, some from Social Security or pensions. If any one source fails or is reduced, the others continue. This is like having multiple streams feeding a river. Even if one stream dries up, the river keeps flowing. The third principle is inflation protection. Your expenses are going to increase over time because of inflation. Your income needs to increase too. This is why I prefer dividend-growing stocks to bonds for long-term income. A bond pays the same interest forever, which means its real purchasing power declines every year. A good dividend stock increases its payment over time, often faster than inflation, which means your real income actually grows. The fourth principle is liquidity cushion. Even with reliable income, you should keep 1 to 2 years of expenses in cash or near cash investments. This serves two purposes. First, it gives you funds to cover unexpected expenses without having to sell investments at potentially bad times. Second, It gives you psychological comfort. Knowing you have 2 years of expenses sitting in the bank changes how you feel about market volatility. You can watch your portfolio decline 30% and not panic because, you do not need to sell anything. The fifth principle is simplicity. Once you have won the game, you do not need complexity. You do not need hedge funds. You do not need alternative investments. You do not need complicated strategies that you cannot explain to your spouse in 5 minutes. Simple, understandable, reliable investments are exactly what you need. A portfolio of blue chip dividend stocks, high quality bonds, and some real estate investment trusts can provide everything you need for a secure retirement. Let me give you a specific example of what a winning portfolio might look like. Say you have accumulated $2 million and you need $75,000 per year in income. Here is how I might structure that. About 40% or $800,000 in dividend-paying stocks. Focus on companies with long histories of dividend growth. Consumer staples, companies that sell products people buy regardless of economic conditions. Utilities that provide essential services. Healthcare companies that benefit from aging demographics. Banks that have weathered multiple crises at an average yield of 3% with dividend growth of 5 to 6%. Annually, this portion generates about $24,000 in year one income that will grow over time. About 30% or $600,000 in bonds and fixed income, treasury bonds, investment grade corporate bonds, perhaps some municipal bonds. If you are in a high tax state, the focus here is safety and reliability, not yield maximization. At an average yield of 4.5%, this generates about $27,000 per year. About 20% or $400,000 in real estate investment trusts. REITs are required by law to distribute 90% of their income, which means they typically yield more than regular stocks. Focus on diversified REITs, or those in stable sectors like apartments, healthcare facilities, or essential retail. At an average yield of 5%, this generates about $20,000 per year. About 10% or $200,000 in cash and short-term instruments. This is your liquidity cushion. Money market funds, short-term treasuries, certificates of deposit. This earns maybe 4% in the current environment, or about $8,000 per year. But its primary purpose is safety and availability, not yield. Add it all up, and you have total income of about $79,000 per year from a $2 million portfolio. That exceeds your $75,000 need with a small cushion. And because 40% of your portfolio is in dividend growth stocks, your income will likely grow by 2 to 3% annually, even without any action on your part. This is a conservative portfolio. It is not going to double in value over the next 5 years. It might not even keep pace with the stock market averages. But that is not the point. The point is reliable. Growing income that exceeds your needs. The point is sleeping well at night. The point is never having to worry about money again. I want to emphasize something about this structure. Notice that I did not say put everything in treasury bills. I did not say avoid stocks entirely. Even in a preservation-focused portfolio, you need some equity exposure for long-term inflation protection. The key is choosing the right equities, stable dividend-paying companies with long track records, not speculative growth stocks that might double or might go to zero. Let me address something that I know is on many minds. What about leaving money to children or grandchildren? Does that change the calculation? Here's how I think about it. First, make sure you are secure. Make sure your income exceeds your expenses with a comfortable margin. Make sure you can handle healthcare costs, long-term care if needed, and all the uncertainties of aging only after you are completely secure, should you think about legacy. Once you are secure, any additional wealth you accumulate is essentially legacy money. You can invest that more aggressively if you want, because it is not money you need. If it grows, wonderful, you can leave more to your heirs. If it shrinks, also fine, because you are not depending on it anyway. This mental separation between money you need and money you do not need is incredibly powerful. It allows you to take appropriate risk with each pool of capital. conservative and income focused for the money you need, more aggressive for the money you do not need. Some people ask me whether they should still be investing in their 70s or 80s. My answer depends entirely on whether they have won the game. If your income exceeds your expenses, if you are financially secure, then continued investment is a choice, not a necessity. You can invest for legacy purposes, for the intellectual stimulation, for the satisfaction of growing wealth, but you do not have to. On the other hand, if you have not yet reached the point where income exceeds expenses, then you may still need to invest for growth even at an advanced age. This is not ideal. Ideally, you reach financial security well before your 70s, but if you are not there yet, the math is the math. You need your portfolio to grow. Let me talk about the psychological dimension of this transition because it is just as important as the financial dimension. Many people struggle to shift from accumulation mode to preservation mode. They have spent their entire adult lives focused on building wealth. It becomes part of their identity. The idea of stopping, of saying enough, feels almost like admitting defeat. I understand this because I have experienced it myself. Even though I crossed the financial finish line over 50 years ago, I kept running, not because I had to, because I wanted to, because the game itself is what motivates me. But here's what I have learned. There is no shame in recognizing that you have won. There is no weakness in shifting to preservation. In fact, it takes tremendous wisdom to know when you have enough. Most people never reach that wisdom. They spend their entire lives chasing more, never content, never secure, always anxious about the next market decline. The moment you recognize that you have won, that your income exceeds your needs, is actually a moment of profound liberation. You are free. Free from the need to check your portfolio daily, free from the anxiety of market volatility, free from the compulsion to always be optimizing and maximizing. You can spend your time and energy on things that actually matter. Family, friends, health, experiences, contribution. I have known people worth hundreds of millions of dollars who lived in constant fear of losing it all. And I have known people with modest portfolios who lived in complete peace because they understood their income would always exceed their needs. The second group was happier. They had achieved something the first group never did. True financial security. Let me give you some specific numbers to help you calibrate where you are. These are rough guidelines based on current yields and typical retirement expenses. If you need $50,000 per year in income, you probably need about $1.2 million to $1.5 million in income-producing investments. That assumes a yield of about 3.5% to 4% from a diversified portfolio of dividend stocks and bonds. If you need $75,000 per year, you probably need about $1.8 million to $2.2 million. If you need $100,000 per year, you probably need about $2.5 million to $3 million. These numbers might seem high. That is because they are designed to provide security and margin for error. You could technically get by with less if you were willing to deplete your principal. But that is not winning the game. That is slowly losing it. True financial security means your principal stays intact while your income covers your life. Now, then we address some common questions that come up when you had success, this topic. What about healthcare costs? Healthcare is one of the biggest uncertainties in retirement, especially in the United States. My advice is to build healthcare into your expense calculation generously. If you are spending $10,000 per year on healthcare, now assume it will be $20,000 or $30,000 in your later years. Also consider long-term care insurance if you can get it at a reasonable price. Better to plan for high healthcare costs and be pleasantly surprised than to plan for low costs and be devastated. What about inflation? This is why I emphasize dividend growth stocks over bonds. Over long periods, dividends from quality companies have grown faster than inflation. Your income stream should increase over time, not stay fixed. A portfolio of dividend aristocrats that raises its collective dividend by 5 or 6% annually will see income double every 12 to 14 years. That outpaces any realistic inflation scenario. What if the market crashes right after I retire? This is where your liquidity cushion becomes essential. If you have 2 years of expenses in cash, you can simply spend from that cushion while waiting for markets to recover. You never have to sell depressed assets. History shows that markets always recover eventually. The key is having enough cushion to ride out the storm. What if I live longer than expected? This is actually a good problem to have. The structure I have described is designed to be sustainable indefinitely. Your principal stays intact. Your income grows over time, whether you live to 80 or 100, the math still works. What about Social Security? Social Security is a valuable source of retirement income that I encourage people to maximize. Delaying benefits until age 70 significantly increases your monthly payment. Those higher payments are inflation adjusted and last for life. For many people, optimizing Social Security strategy can be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime. Let me give you specific numbers, because this is one of the most important decisions many retirees make. If your full retirement benefit at age 67 is $2,000 per month, taking benefits at 62 reduces that to about $1,400 per month. But waiting until 70 increases it to about $2,500 per month. That is 78% more income for life. Now, some people argue that you should take Social Security early because you might not live long enough to benefit from waiting. This argument sounds logical, but is usually wrong for several reasons. First, if you have other resources to draw from, waiting allows Social Security to grow while you spend down other assets. You are essentially converting lower yielding assets into a higher yielding inflation protected income stream. Second, the break-even point is usually around age 80. If you live past 80, which statistically most healthy 62-year-olds will, waiting was the right choice. Third, Social Security provides valuable insurance against longevity risk. If you live to 95, those higher monthly payments will be worth far more than the earlier but smaller payments would have been. Fourth, for married couples, delaying the higher earner's benefit protects the surviving spouse. When one spouse dies, the survivor keeps the larger of the two benefits. A higher benefit provides better protection for the surviving spouse who may live many more years alone. The optimal Social Security strategy depends on your specific situation, but for most people, waiting at least until full retirement age and often until 70 is the right choice if they have other assets to bridge the gap. Let me share one more principle that I think is crucial but rarely discussed. The transition from accumulation to preservation is not just financial. It is emotional and psychological. You have spent decades building wealth. Your identity is wrapped up in being a saver, an investor, someone who is building towards something. Shifting to preservation mode can feel like giving up, like admitting you are old, like accepting that your best earning years are behind you. I want to reframe this for you. Reaching the point where you no longer need to invest for retirement is not an ending. It is an achievement. It is the culmination of decades of discipline and sacrifice. It is proof that you did something most people never accomplish. You secured your financial future through your own efforts. When you reach this point, you have earned the right to stop worrying. You have earned the right to spend your time on things that matter more than money. You have earned the right to be present with family and friends instead of constantly thinking about your portfolio. This is not giving up. This is graduating. This is winning. I have seen too many people reach financial security and fail to enjoy it. They keep worrying. They keep optimizing. They keep comparing themselves to others. They die with more money than they ever needed, but never experience the peace and freedom that money was supposed to provide. Do not let that be you. When you win the game, claim your victory. Shift your focus from accumulating to living. Spend money on experiences with people you love. Give to causes that matter to you. Travel to places you have always wanted to see. Time is the one resource you cannot buy more of, and every day spent worrying about money you do not need is a day wasted. Let me close with a story that brings all of this together. Several years ago, I received a letter from a woman who had followed my advice for decades. She had invested in quality companies reinvested her dividends, lived below her means, and accumulated a portfolio worth about $2 million. She was 72 years old. Her question was whether she should shift more into bonds because she was getting older, and she had heard that older investors should be more conservative. I asked her the same questions I mentioned earlier. What are your expenses? About $60,000 per year. What is your investment income? About $90,000 per year. I wrote back to her with a simple message: you have won. Your income exceeds your expenses by 50%. You could lose a third of your portfolio and still be fine. Stop worrying, enjoy your life, spend time with your grandchildren, travel if you want to, give to causes you care about. The financial part of your life is solved. She wrote back a few months later to tell me that was the most liberating advice she had ever received for the first time in her adult life. She stopped worrying about money. She stopped checking her portfolio every day. She started living. That is what financial security looks like, not a number in an account. A feeling of peace that comes from knowing you have enough, from knowing your income will always exceed your needs, from knowing you have won a game that most people never win. The exact moment you no longer need to invest for retirement is the moment your reliable investment income exceeds your annual expenses by at least 25%. When you reach that moment, recognize it, celebrate it, and then shift your focus from accumulating more to preserving what you have and enjoying the life you have earned. You have worked hard to get here. You have saved when others spent. You have invested when others speculated. You have been patient when others panicked. Now it is time to enjoy the fruits of that discipline. The game is over. You won.